Wonderful. Good morning, everyone, and good to see you all. And thank you so much to Dan, Kathleen, Emily, and everyone in the organizing team for bringing us together to here, which is quite unique to have the academic and think tank and business community in one room. I really appreciate that. And I've very much enjoyed the two previous panels, an event that we as British American Business were very happy to support. I've been introduced. My name is Emanuel. I'm serving as the Chief Policy and Trade Officer for the group, British American Business. We're slightly unique for those who don't know as well, in the sense that we bring together both the AmCham in the UK, so representing primarily large US companies with operations in the UK, but we also represent the BritishAm in the US, meaning that we also represent the majority of large British headquartered companies that in many cases have actually more of a footprint in the US than they would do in the UK. It's a great honor and privilege to facilitate this fireside. Thank you so much for allowing me to do that. We have had the chance to meet before in a different setting and talk about many of the things that we have already touched on in the two previous panels. It's a great honor to welcome you, Congressman Adrian Smith, Chairman of the Race and Means Subcommittee on Trade. Chairman, I wonder whether you knew what you were walking into and accepting and keeping that role as Chairman of the Trade Committee. You can, if you want to, enlighten us as part of your remarks. To give you a little bit of a background, we've had two panels already. In the first panel, we tried to unpack the economic and prosperity deal done between the US and the UK and where we take it from here. And in the second panel, we looked into what the new world that we find ourselves in, the impact of the new world that we find ourselves in on trade has on businesses and supply chains, among others. That gives you already an indication that there is a feeling in the room, and one of the panelists on the first panel mentioned it, that the world has changed and we need to embrace that. And the question is now, where do we take that from here? And that takes me to a little bit of a kickoff of this conversation, allowing for you to give us an introduction into your views on where we are on trade, maybe what you think has changed, has something changed, and how should we look at those changes to better understand what is currently happening and where we find ourselves in today. Thank you so much, Chairman, and over to you.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to have conversation here, and thank you for taking the time to listen. There, I think, are many dynamics. Let me just kind of list out what I think major points are, observations of the last 8 years. Trump 1.0, now this term 2.0, and the Biden term in between, or even rewind to the campaign of 2016, where Hillary Clinton changed on TPP, her position, to match that of Donald Trump's. And so then obviously Trump won, but that kind of teed up a lot of things moving forward. And at the end of the first Trump term, a lot of Democrats, and they still speak well of Ambassador Lighthizer, given the exchange that took place and the priorities, say in USMCA, but overall the dialogue that took place between the administration and Democrats. And as you recall, USMCA, a Trump priority, was completed during a Pelosi speakership. And maybe you've heard me say before, but if that can be done, pretty much anything can be done. And so, but that, I think the overall result was, I think trade has become a more bipartisan issue, whether it's Democrats speaking out against tariffs now when that wasn't previously the case. I'll be really honest with you, and listening to the criticism of the Trump tariffs during 1.0, and then nothing done about them for 4 years when there was a very ample opportunity to, and not just perhaps undo what Trump had done previously, that's not what I'm saying, but to really find a cadence on trade to achieve, I think, things that, whether it was leading on extending AGOA, MTB, GSP. I mean, a lot of things that are important to our supply chains and various things. So then you had the campaign that President Trump ran last year that, let's face it, teed up his actions that he's making good on the campaign promises. Now, all that said, I'm still not a fan of tariffs for various reasons. I'm encouraged that conversations are taking place. The UK is a good example. I got asked a lot, well, can we get something with the UK and really save agriculture for later? Now, I represent the #1 ag district in the House, so I am a bit biased. And I want to say that I don't expect the first step to be perfect, to include everything that I would love for it to include. But and that's why I think we're headed in the right direction here. I didn't want to see agriculture, U.S. agriculture, aced out. And so I'm glad that I think we are on some in a positive direction now. I wouldn't say it's complete, but when we've got some momentum heading in the right direction, I think that's good. I've also been emphasizing that there's really no such thing as stagnation in trade. We're either gaining ground or we are losing ground. And obviously, the Trump approach is not what I would describe as conventional. It is disruptive. He campaigned on that. I also believe, though, that it is a sincere effort to ultimately reduce trade barriers. Let's not forget the non-tariff trade barriers, and because there's so much attention given to various tariffs, various countries, but with numbers, specific numbers. For agriculture, it's the non-tariff trade barriers that can be very damaging. Take Australia, our friend, with whom we have a trade agreement, long-standing trade agreement. They take none of our beef right now, 0. We take theirs, we continue to take theirs. I don't really like that equation. And so I think it instructs us that we need to pay attention even, to completed trade agreements, that we need to establish a habit of updating things. And I don't think it needs to be disruptive necessarily, but overall, as you know, trade is a lot of work. It's highly, highly detailed and impossible to boil down to a 30-second soundbite. And so it's really on us right now to engage in, and I'm encouraged that many conversations are taking place right now with several countries. We tend to be getting more details all the time. India, 3 tranches, basically. I think great opportunity for more market access for our products in a very significant population.
Thank you so much, and thank you also for restating that you're not a fan of tariffs. Neither are many of those in the room, I'm sure. But at the same time, we also appreciate you giving us, in a perspective of a reality that we find ourselves in. And I personally would agree that this is a healthy approach for partners to take as they negotiate and talk to you and officials in the various departments. I would love to go back to the trade piece, but actually as you can imagine, many of the folks here in the room are linked up in any way or some way or form and talk a lot about trade, which is great. When I ask around, what is something that we should ask you in this format here? The first thing that actually came up was the one big, beautiful bill. And so not necessarily what you make out of the U.S.-UK trade agreement. We'll get to that in a moment. But the question was, given that this is currently the big issue that we are following, many of us are following. So I was curious, as chair of the Trade Subcommittee, are there trade and investment-related dimensions in that bill? If so, what are those for you? Thinking here particularly about tax, which was brought up as part of the first panel. And what can we expect from that journey with view to our trade and investment landscape?
Well, one thing that I've been working on is making sure that we don't codify tariffs and then use the revenue to build into the budget and in the bill itself. So I think we're in a good place with that. Obviously, you've probably read about de minimis. There's very intense member opinions on de minimis, and so we've had to process all of those. De minimis. I think it's fair to say that it has morphed into various things that weren't intended. At the same time, I don't want to suggest that flipping a switch here and there can all of a sudden make everything bad turn into good. I want to temper expectations and just really caution what expectations should be. So I think, though, moving forward, we've got obviously a very large piece of legislation. It's going to have, when you look at the international dynamic on tax, that's very significantly oriented to trade in a little different way, though, than obviously a trade agreement might be. But looking back to in the run-up to 2017, I really felt that the international components of tax were the lowest hanging fruit was the international piece that incorporate. Here we saw these inversions happening, but also there, as you know, the dynamic of U.S. companies with an operation overseas for a foreign market, in a foreign country for that foreign market. Now, Joe Biden as vice president described that as shipping jobs overseas. Now, I like the fact that a good, solid American company can stand up an operation in another country and strengthen the American company as a result. I think that's great. Now, we want tax policy that encourages them to bring their profits back here rather than leave that cash parked in other countries. Now, I think we were very successful in 2017 on various fronts relating to that. And remember that even Barack Obama was calling for a reduced corporate rate. I think he was bothered by these inversions that were taking place on such a regular basis that one thing we really stopped in its tracks with the 2017 tax legislation. And I think, even though the corporate rate was considered permanent then, as much as anything around here can be permanent, but the talk about adjusting the corporate rate this time, I think we were able to put that to rest because we didn't want to create another atmosphere of having inversions on a regular basis, and whether they would take 21% or a higher rate with them, they would take all of it if they inverted. So I think we're in a much better place now for good reason. And overall, the conversations we've had on the Ways and Means Committee over the last few months, I think, have been the most substantive, consequential conversations I've had on my time on the committee.
Thank you very much. Quick follow-up question, only a quick answer needed. You've talked about U.S. companies and other markets. One of the proposals as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill is a proposal 899 that looks at potentially increasing the tax burden, quote unquote, for companies that originate from other countries that have discriminatory taxes on U.S. companies in their legislation. For example, digital services taxes. So would you think that maybe one of the origins there is to make the speed of the wider trade conversation to encourage those countries indeed to review some of their existing measures right now and rules for U.S. companies? Is that maybe part of the thinking there?
Short answer, yes. Digital trade, I think, is probably one of the most bipartisan concerns right now, obviously with its development. And it's not just about data flows. It's not just about a handful of big tech companies. This takes so many forms across the economy, the worldwide economy, that other countries think of it just as some moving parts that they can that they would argue they have the sovereignty to tax. But then when you really look at it, how discriminatory it is toward our country because of the dominance that we have in that sector. So there's more attention being paid to this. Things are different now than say the IPEF conversations that wouldn't talk about market access, that even set digital aside, or WTO that pushes things away that need discussion, as you point out, that these are very modern things that we need to address, and I would hope that we will have a strong position of not expecting special treatment, just equal treatment, especially on digital.
Thank you very much. A couple more questions, and I'm aware that you're very generous with your time with us today, so I will allow for questions from the audience at some point. You've mentioned in your opening comments, trade is complicated, it takes time, it's not done overnight. What do you make of the U.S.-UK agreement that was signed 2 weeks ago and the approach that the administration has currently taken to signing whatever you call those agreements, deals? What is your take? What are the lessons that we can learn?
Well, like I said, I think it's a good first step. If any two countries in the world can do this, it should be the UK and the US. And with shared values, somewhat geographic proximity, a little bit of water in between, but still fairly direct. I think I think the President Trump, he appreciates the engagement, and he's able to communicate with. You saw the exchange when they announced the deal with the British Prime Minister on the phone. I see that as just a very positive development, and especially when things were paused for 4 years after, Trump at the end of his first term teed up UK, Kenya, more enforcement on China, and we didn't see much come from that. So obviously, the president is taking the approach that he has, and he is bringing folks to the table who I don't think would have come to the table otherwise. And time will tell what that delivers ultimately. But I am at this point, I am encouraged. The president fully understands, and he spoke to the House Republicans this morning, and he is very aware that everything he does as an executive without Congress passing a bill, that it only lasts basically the length of his term. I think he's interested in having a bigger impact than that, and so that obviously can't be done without Congress, and so that gives emphasis to why we need to take legislative action ultimately to have the durability that is necessary to create more investment, encourage more investment, resulting from more stability and consistency.
Thank you. And if I may, also a quick follow-up on this. We have we are in the middle of a 90-day pause on the reciprocal tariffs. Deadline for those for the pause to end is early July. Are you optimistic that we will see more conversations and talks until then? Because, as you say, trade is complicated. We've seen the UK, we've seen something with China, but we are quite a few weeks in already into those 90 days. So what is your view on the remainder of those 90 days, and maybe where do we go from mid-July then?
I did notice that the Treasury Secretary announcing that there might be groups of countries. I would ask if that would be considered a multilateral agreement, but I won't go there. We have, logistically speaking, that if you go on the assertion that 20 plus countries are willing to step forward with details, that's further than what other countries are saying. The dozens say they want to have a conversation but haven't offered details yet. though, if you just take the 20 plus who offer details, like I said, it, this is important stuff, and we need to get this right. And so, logistically speaking, it's going to need all hands on deck here by July 9th, right?
July 9th.
And a lot of attention being paid to this for good reason, and I think we should celebrate that. And there will be USMCA. I'll tell you, there were some components to that gave me heartburn, but they didn't become deal breakers. And so I'm going to guess that even though I've had a significant hand in the input on this big bill that hopefully passes this week, there are probably going to be some components that I won't really like, but overall, we need to move this forward for our country, for opportunity, for our economy, and similar to trade. Let's get some momentum here because it's needed. Supply chains. Let's just say that we pass our tax bill, we get some trade agreements going. That's good. Now, our supply chains have needed some work for some time, from COVID and those disruptions. So there's a lot at stake.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate the point that you made on Congress wanting and having to be involved if the president wanted to create a legacy that goes beyond his term. I think that's an important point to make. Other voices that I'm sure you're familiar with coming from the Hill sometimes is that alone to just create a little bit more organization into everything that's currently happening, it would be good to have Congress more involved. And we very much welcome that, I think, across the board here. What is, in your view, a path forward to have Congress involved on trade policy going forward? You have been co-signing the United Act that was specifically designed for the UK talks. I know that in the Senate there are some there's support in maybe looking at trade promotion authority again, which would be really interesting, honestly, if just to think through how would trade promotion authority look like today vis-a-vis the last two times when it was granted. For you, what would be a reasonable path forward to have Congress involved to support the president's agenda, but also create a long-lasting legacy and also structure for U.S. trade policy going forward?
Well, I think Kenya would be a great opportunity. My sense is even, last year and the year before, very bipartisan interest in completing a trade agreement with Kenya. How you tee that up with TPA along the way, that's TBD. But there's great opportunity. Obviously, we need to get other things extended, AGOA, Haiti, GSP, MTB as well. But I think the president has a great opportunity to have his team lead the way, take what they and run with what they left the Biden administration with in 2021 relating to Kenya. Move that forward. I think that sends a great message, because Africa has a lot to offer. Critical minerals, available workforce. There are great examples. Take Mauritius, for example, that has done very well with AGOA. In fact, they've done so well with AGOA, there's concerns about what's next. And that, I think, can be replicated across the continent as well. It will require work across the rest of the continent. But I think Kenya, with the work that's already been done, I think it's doable in the short
That would be
term.
a traditional free trade agreement, and traditional in the sense that as we know it, comprehensive,
that's
with congressional approval.
Yes, that's my opinion. And the administration can celebrate what they accomplished previously, and that we're moving that forward. Agriculturally speaking, I heard from Kenya leaders, 6 years ago probably, that it was an opportunity to take Kenya in a direction more toward our agriculture policies rather than the EU's agriculture policy. And the EU, after UK, perhaps Kenya and some others, the EU, it's going to be a lot of work.
Thank you. Many colleagues here in the room would be as qualified to sit here and ask those questions. So I'm just looking into the room and see whether anyone wants to already kick it off before I go back to my questions. And we have a question over there already, a second question over here. Why don't we just go ahead, and then I will decide whether we take 2 or 3 together or just individually. Thank you so much. And if you don't mind just introducing yourself so that everyone knows who you are. Thank you so much.
Fascinating discussion. I'm Katie Balls from the Times of London. Just listening to your comments about agriculture and where the UK-US trade deal can go next. In the UK, a deal has just been signed between the UK and the EU, which has seen alignment on various welfare standards when it comes to agriculture. Is that going to impact, do you think, how far the UK and US can go when it comes to the next steps?
I think it could. I would like to remain optimistic that some of the momentum we currently have, and when you say welfare, you mean animal welfare? Right. I would hope that, as we should all be concerned about the cost of food and the affordability for those folks who are struggling economically, we ought not pursue policies that drive up the cost of food. Let's focus even domestically on the science of animal agriculture. That it's fairly obvious. There are political things, political agendas that pop up. So, I think it's unfortunate that across Europe and even the UK, it's held against our poultry producers that clean their equipment with chlorine. That chlorinated chicken. No, it's really cleaning products of the machinery that actually result in a safer product for consumers. So let's not let the facts get in the way of what is really at stake here. But I think, to your question, though, the momentum that we currently have, I think, is a good thing. Let's continue to push. I don't expect to get to perfect. There's incremental opportunities here along the way.
Thanks so much for the question. Second question is right over here, and then feel free to let me know, and I will make sure that you get here just right in the front. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Katie, my fellow Brit, asked my question too, but I'll think of a supplementary. Ed Owen, former UK government advisor consulting here in DC. Just to bring you back to Congress's role, so particularly within the UK-US context, as other panelists earlier were saying, the deal that was struck 2 weeks ago now was I think it's been described as a head of terms or a term sheet, so rather general and not much detail. Do you regard then, is this a potential opportunity for Congress to take a more active role in pushing the executive to strike agreements and discussions in certain areas? I'm just interested in how you, from a congressional perspective, now take that as being, is that now a template that you can take away and push in particular areas? And I suppose picking up Katie's point about agri-food, it does seem that the UK is now committing to the regulatory environment of the EU. If there was any doubt about that, that seems to have been put to bed from this week's deal. That is going to be quite a big obstacle, isn't it, for a more comprehensive agreement?
You could even add to your question whether the term sheet could turn into a traditional FTA that also serves, like Kenya, as a template for others to follow.
I think there's that potential, and I think ultimately, though, the administration would benefit well, especially given the standing of trade as a bipartisan issue right now. And let me say, more open trade as a bipartisan issue right now. It would, for the critics of the president, who perhaps dislike Trump tariffs disproportionately more than other tariffs, give them an opportunity, though, after a negotiation like this, that it could look like an FTA, put it before Congress. The administration, I think, should see great opportunity with something like this because it shows solid results from what they have been doing for a few months now, realizing that, you know, there's so many things happening in a short period of time that the stability and the consistency that can come about from an agreement, whether it's settled executively right now, but even better, that consistency from legislative action, that would be huge. And I think economically, the numbers would look even better than what, you know, might be delivered unilaterally by the White House.
Thank you very much. And any other question before? Here we go. Actually, 2 more questions. Why don't we continue there? Do appreciate your engagement. Thank you very much.
My name is Emanuel, and I think what caught my attention, because I was also involved in the Kenya-US Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership negotiations, and I agree with what you mentioned about the potential of that agreement. Perhaps what are your thoughts on the fact that something that somehow could be developed was on market access? Because the STIP agreement generally was on standards and not so much focus on market access. So how could that be developed, as you're saying, because it has a lot of potential? It could be a template, or it could sort of be replicated around the continent. And so it's an interesting issue. I would love to hear your views on how we could build up on that to open up the market in Kenya and in Africa.
Well, I don't think we're really talking, these aren't my words, these have been said by others. We're not really talking about trade unless we're talking about market access, especially when you see the contrasts of what current policies are compared to other countries, you know, our country compared to other countries. President Trump, I mean, he is zeroing in on these contrasts. And so to see true market access being discussed, I think other countries expect this. And that's the sense I got over the last 4 years, is other countries were expecting more from us than they saw. I mean, maybe you've heard me describe IPEF as really being IPUF, because it just didn't want to talk about anything that was really very difficult at all. And then I took that a step further after the election, and it turned, IPEF turned into IPUF, and then the election happened and it went IPOOF. So other countries expect more from us. And President Trump knows this. He sees this. And so we need to leverage that. We, meaning all of us who are involved in trade policy, to set some goals and to aim for those. And I think we can get to a much better place. I mean, here we were with opportunities for a trade agreement with Kenya that already enjoys AGOA benefits. And the previous administration said, well, we'll talk to Kenya, but not about tariffs. What's there left to talk about? That would be in our interest. And let me just tell you that I expect other countries engaging on trade to reflect their interests. Other countries expect us to reflect our interests too. It's about striking, you know, finding that agreement where it can be mutually beneficial, that overall gets us to a better place with fewer barriers and ultimately more economic opportunity.
Thank you very much. Another question over here.
Thank you. My name is Margaret Spiegelman. I'm with Inside U.S. Trade. I'm wondering if you could say a little more about prospects for renewing AGOA this year, given, you know, of course, that, you know, AGOA beneficiaries are among the countries that are subject to the reciprocal tariffs, and also comments, you know, we've heard from Senator Wyden that USTR described AGOA to him as a giveaway. Do you have a different impression from the administration? Do you believe there's still an appetite for preference programs? And if so, what do you think that will look like?
Thank you.
Yeah, these preference programs haven't gotten the attention for or against that other issues have gotten, especially within trade. So we've got the large bill that we need to get done. I would love to get that out of the House this week so that we can focus on some of these other things that need more attention. A continuation of the status quo, probably not expected. I mean, I wouldn't expect a continuation of the status quo supported by the administration. That's my speculation. When you look at, say, another 10-year, perhaps, AGOA, we need to answer the questions. What do we do about a country like Mauritius and graduating out of AGOA? That's an unanswered question right now, and we're going to have to deal with that. But I think we can have some of these conversations that are important to have and definitely relevant pursuant to our supply chains and, constantly moving forward, like I said, rather than just trying to mark time and standing in place. Let's move forward with continued conversations, exchanges, and ideas, though. But we're going to have to deliver, whether it's codifying a trade agreement, whether it is taking the preference program and with some tweaks, making it deliver more consistency and help investment and stabilize that to leverage that stability.
Thank you very much. Well, let me start to wrap up with a final set of questions. The US has had one of its largest trade deficits, I think, in February. Now, that has been also partially because companies were trying to get products into the country in expectation of future tariffs. But of course, it doesn't hide the fact that the US has a large trade deficit in goods. An objective by the president and the administration is to reduce the trade deficit. And this is why we have discussed earlier, we don't really see right now much movement on the 10% tariff rate as a baseline. And hopefully it doesn't remain, and you give us some hope, but we definitely see that currently happening. I just wonder, where does that end? I mean, because if you try to take this approach forever, then you may end up with having the US having a surplus with everyone else, potentially. So the question is, where is a landing zone here? And that takes me to a way for you to also open it up again as part of your concluding remarks. Things have been quite fast over the last few months. Where do you think we are in a year from now? If we were to do this in a year from now and we all sit here again, what kind of world would we find?
Well, think about, a year from now, we're heading into the next election. I think the president would be very eager to want to say, here's what I've done. Here's what I campaigned on. Here's what we did. Here's what we ended up with. And hopefully celebrating new investments being made that can deliver positive results ultimately for consumers. Speaking as a representative of agriculture, I want policies that help producers. I also want policies that help consumers. And when consumers do well, it's amazing how many other parts of our economy do well. And so I think that the president will want to be campaigning that midterm with a list of accomplishments. And I think there's a very real possibility that, let's face it, TPA, if we had traditional TPA, we would be tasking the administration with negotiation. And so, I would love to get back to, kind of the regular order, but I also know that as President Trump is advocating for other countries to remove their barriers, we know he's serious about this. And I think there can be very positive results from that, and that can be campaigned on for the midterm.
Thank you very much. Just looking around whether there's any final question. Otherwise, very happy to wrap this up and say thank you so much, Chairman, for spending your time with us this morning. We do appreciate your leadership. We do appreciate you giving us perspective on how we should look at trade these days and what we also want to look forward to. I think we are all joined up and linked up in our ambition to make America great, to make business in America great, but not to the disadvantage of what, for example, US businesses do abroad or UK businesses can do here.
Well, thank you very much. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Looking at just all this information that I've been sorting through over the last few years, and I always use McDonald's as a common example, that there are twice as many McDonald's restaurants outside the US as inside. I think that's pretty cool. And the list is quite long. As you guys know, you know that there are so many great US companies who do well in other markets around the world. Let's celebrate that. How can we pursue more of that? And then with the right tax policy, to make sure that we as U.S. taxpayers can benefit from profits coming back in and fairly taxed, that can encourage even more investment here domestically as well. We are obviously in a very unique scenario given the size of our market, the challenges that China faces all on their own, not to mention what actions we take that might impact them as well. So the world is looking to us to lead, and I think that's okay. This shows great opportunity for us, and engaging the American people, because let's face it, that's what we need to do. And I think the American people are more in tune on trade than they have been previously, especially pre-2017. And that is good. So let's take what we know has been successful, build on that, and I think we can deliver even more positive results than we've seen in the past. And ultimately, it's about opportunity, and that engagement can lead to more opportunity, and that's a win-win scenario for all those involved. So thank you so much. Look forward to keeping in touch.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to you, and thank you to your team for helping to make this go. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will now have a 15-minute coffee break before we reconvene with our second keynote fireside chat. Thank you again, Chairman.